welcome to The Explainer. All right, today we are taking on a real heavyweight of philosophy, Immanuel Kant. We're going to dive right into his critique of practical reason because, believe me, it holds an idea that totally flipped a script on how we think about morality, freedom, and, our sense of duty. So how do you even begin with Kant? Well, instead of bogging us down with a bunch of dense theory right away, he does something brilliant. He just throws us right into the deep end. He presents us with this really stark moral choice, a scenario that's designed to strip away all the noise, leaving just the raw, naked question of duty. So picture this. Your prince, a real tyrant, demands that you tell a lie that's going to condemn a totally innocent person. And if you refuse, well, the gallows are waiting for you. I mean, what an impossible choice, right? But here's the thing. For Kant, this thought experiment isn't about trying to guess what you would actually do in a moment of sheer panic. No. It's about getting you to recognize that feeling, that gut feeling of what you know you ought to do, even when your own life is literally on the line. And Kant's takeaway from this is, wow, it's just so profound. He argues that even if you're sitting there thinking, I don't know if I could actually make that sacrifice, you still have to admit that it's possible to do the right thing. And that little voice inside your head, the one that whispers, I ought to tell the truth, Kant says that is your direct personal experience of a massive philosophical truth. You are free. The moral law isn't some cage. It's the very thing that proves you are free from just being a puppet of your instincts and your fears.
Okay, so where does this powerful, almost commanding sense of ought even come from? I mean, for ages, philosophers had tried to pin morality on something else. Usually it was all about the pursuit of happiness. But for Kant, nope. That was a huge, fundamental mistake.
Look, Kant draws this razor-sharp line in the sand. On one side, you've got rules based on happiness. These are basically just bits of advice, right? Hey, if you want to be happy, then maybe you should do this. They're always conditional. But the moral law, it's completely different. It doesn't give advice, it commands. It just says, do this, period, full stop. For Kant, duty is something that should be crystal clear to everyone, whereas the path to happiness, well, in his own words, it's veiled in impenetrable obscurity. Good luck figuring that one out.
So he kind of looks back at the whole history of ethics, and he sees the same basic mistake being made over and over and over again. He says, look, all these past systems, they're all based on what he calls material principles. What does that mean? It means they all started with something they wanted to achieve. Maybe it was pleasure, or a nice feeling, or reaching some state of perfection, or even just making God happy. And then they basically worked backwards from there to figure out the rules.
And Kant had a great name for this whole approach, heteronomy. It basically means rule by another. See, in every single one of those other systems, the rule that's guiding your will is coming from somewhere outside of your own pure reason. It's coming from your desires, your inclinations, or some external boss like a king or a god. And for Kant, that was a non-starter. That could never be the foundation for a moral law that applies to everyone, everywhere, all the time. Okay, so this raises a huge question. If the moral law isn't about any specific material stuff, it's not about getting pleasure, it's not about achieving certain outcomes, then what on earth is left? I mean, how can you even have a law that has no content? It sounds impossible, but Kant's answer here is just, it's absolutely brilliant. He says the moral law isn't about its content, it's all about its form.
And to show us how this works in the real world, Kant gives us this fantastic little test. So imagine this. You're holding on to a deposit for someone, but that person has died, and oops, there's no record of it. Now, your personal rule, what Kant calls your maxim, might be something like, hey, finders keepers, I'll just keep the money. Okay, now for the test. Could you honestly want this to be a universal law for everybody? And you immediately see the problem, right? Because if everyone started secretly denying that they were holding deposits, then the whole practice of leaving deposits would just vanish. It would become totally meaningless. Your personal rule, when you try to make it universal, literally destroys itself. And this is what leads us to Kant's big revolutionary idea, autonomy. Literally, self-rule. See, for him, true morality isn't about following some rule that's handed to you from the outside. It's about your very own rational will giving the law to itself. The power of that law, its authority, doesn't come from some goal you're trying to reach or some desire you have. It comes from its pure structure. It's basic fitness to be a law for everybody.
But this whole idea of autonomy, it does more than just define right and wrong. For Kant, this is the key that unlocks the very nature of human freedom itself.
And right here, this is the absolute heart of Kant's entire argument. Freedom and the moral law, they're like two sides of the very same coin. Just think about it for a second. If your will is capable of acting on a law that it gives to itself, a law based on pure reason, not on some passing desire, then that will, by definition, has to be free. And you can flip it around too. If you are truly free, what other principle could you possibly follow except for the universal law of reason itself? It's a perfect loop.
So, you might be asking, okay, but how do we know for sure that this law even exists inside us? Well, Kant calls our deep, undeniable awareness of that moral I ought, that feeling we all have, he calls it the fact of reason. It's not some abstract thing we prove with a fancy logical proof. It's a direct, immediate experience we all have. And that inner voice, that command of reason, is really the only proof we need that we're more than just biological machines, more than simple cause and effect creatures. It's our proof that we are, in a very deep sense, free. All right, so if you're with him so far, if you accept that we're free beings who are bound by this internal moral law, then Kant says our reason kind of forces us to make a few more logical leaps. He calls these postulates. Now, these are things we can't really prove with absolute certainty, but we have to assume they're true for the whole moral system to hang together and make sense. And here Kant bumps up against a problem that, let's be honest, we all see every day. The moral law tells us to be virtuous, to be worthy of being happy. But then you just look around at the world. It's pretty clear that being a good person doesn't guarantee you're going to be a happy one. And this creates a real problem, a kind of tension for our rational minds. So to resolve that tension, our own reason demands that we have to aim for some kind of ultimate goal. Kant calls this the highest good. And what is that? Well, it's the ideal state of affairs, the perfect world, where being virtuous is perfectly lined up with being happy, where goodness gets its just rewards. And striving to make that world a reality, he says, is actually our ultimate duty. Okay, so if it's our duty to try and bring about this highest good, then we are logically forced to assume two pretty big things are true. First, the immortality of the soul. Now, why on earth would we need that? Well, because becoming perfectly morally good isn't something you can just tick off a to-do list in one lifetime. It's an endless process, so you need an endless amount of time to work on it. And second, we have to assume the existence of God. Why? Because we need some kind of power, some cause, that is powerful enough to make sure the universe is ultimately fair, to guarantee that happiness gets doled out in perfect proportion to how virtuous you are. But, and this is super important, Kant is absolutely crystal clear on this point. These are not scientific proofs. He's not saying, here, I've proven God exists. Not at all. We can't know, in a theoretical sense, that God and immortality are real. Instead, he calls this a rational faith. They are necessary assumptions that our practical, moral reason needs in order to function properly. We don't prove them. We just have to live our lives as if they were true for morality to make ultimate sense. So where does this all lead? What's the final payoff for this huge, intricate argument? Well, it all builds up to a completely radical new vision of where morality even comes from. And along with it, a brand new foundation for why human beings have dignity. And this is Kant's ultimate, most powerful point. The moral law inside us, it's holy, it's inviolable. And because every single rational person is the author of that very same law, because we all have this incredible capacity for autonomy, that means every single person has an inherent, almost sacred worth. That's what it means to be an end in yourself, and not just a tool to be used for someone else's plans. Our ability to give ourselves the moral law, that's what makes humanity itself holy. So in the end, Kant leaves us with this incredible challenge. He really forces us to look in the mirror and decide for ourselves, where does our sense of right and wrong actually come from? Is it something outside of us, found in our feelings, our goals, or some external authority telling us what to do? Or is it, as Kant so powerfully argued, the voice of our very own reason? Is it a law that we give to ourselves, and in doing so grant ourselves both our freedom and our ultimate inviolable dignity? It's a massive question, and one that absolutely continues to shape the world we live in today.